Welcome to another edition of the Mediatwits. I'm Mark Glazer, Executive Editor of PBS Media Shift. This week we'll be talking about Apple's big announcement. Did it get its mojo back with the Apple Watch, its first wearable, as well as Apple Pay, a simple mobile payment system, and new iPhone 6s that are larger, getting into the phablet space. Will this be a turnaround for Apple, which has been on a little bit of a lull lately post Steve Jobs? Before we get into our discussion, I want to thank our sponsor for the podcast, NextSpace and Next Kids Potrero Hill in San Francisco, where they offer co-working space and adjacent daycare for infants and toddlers. Learn more about their pioneering program at bit.ly/NextSpacePH. You can learn more about NextSpace co-working spaces around the country at nextspace.us. And in fact, we are at NextSpace right now, or I am, and my baby son is here as well. So it's a great concept. So we're going to talk about, on this show, about Apple. We will all be fanboys or haters for the day. I want to introduce our panel. We have Alex Leo, our regular from Newsweek, Andrew Lee from American University, our producer Fanny Cohen in New York, Leander Khani at Cult of Mac, Sapna Maheshwari from BuzzFeed in New York, Wilson Rothman at the Wall Street Journal in San Francisco. Let's start with Leander. You've been through some of these dog and pony shows before.
Yeah.
Where do you think this, everyone's talking about this is going back to the old days. This is, at the Flint Center where a lot of big Apple products were released. Where does this stack up in kind of the history of Apple events, do you think?
I've only been to one Apple event that was clearly historic, and that was the Steve Jobs iPhone introduction in 2007. That was clearly felt like there was an air, a thing in the air that felt like this is going to be historic. And previous ones only sort of became clearly historic in retrospect. Even the iMac one at the Flint Center, that was the one that kickstarted Apple's resurgence. But at the time, they were like, "Oh, this computer is a weird plastic bubble. Who's going to buy this?" That one seemed like a bust. And it's only 10 years later when you look back at it and you go, oh yeah, that was historic. But I think this one is, definitely is going to be memorable for sure. We'll see how the watch turns out. I think it's going to be a hit, but it may not be.
Wilson, what do you think? I mean, where do you think this one kind of ranks as far as Apple events and moving into wearables? What do you think Apple's chances are?
Well, I think Apple's got as good or better chances as anyone to move into wearables. I think there's so much that's just all unclaimed territory, and Apple's obviously already come out and shown a product that's a lot smarter and better designed than anything we've seen yet. That doesn't mean that once Apple perfects the formula, everyone will come in behind, sweep in, and kind of start stealing market share. That's kind of how it goes. But I do think, as far as wearables go, Apple did set the pace this week. I think that the thing that we can't ignore, though, is the real history might be in Apple Pay. I don't want to change the subject, but I think that's the kind of the sleeper hit of the week.
Does everyone else agree? I mean, is the Apple Watch just kind of the flashy, kind of high-end thing, but really it's Apple Pay, this mobile payment system that will end up being the lasting thing from this? Sapna, what do you think?
I mean, we definitely thought here that Apple Pay is the big takeaway from this. The watch, I think people had an idea, obviously, who cover companies like Fossil and Movado were expecting this, and of course it'll make a splash, but I mean, even at the estimates for the market in the next few years, Apple Pay seems to have the capability of making a bigger impact, I think, especially in people's day-to-day behavior. Watch that.
Alex, what were you saying?
Yeah, I think that there's something interesting about the watch that has nothing to do with the actual technology, but the shot across the bow of several other companies. So, Google Glass has been unveiling for what feels like a decade. Like, I can't remember a time before we were talking about Google Glass, even though it's fairly recent. And yet, there's 5 people who love it who are on Good Morning America when, they talk about it. And another shot across the bow is obviously to Fitbit, to the wearable health market. And I feel like this is Apple saying, you know what, this is sweet that you guys thought you could do this and have a brand based around one thing, but we're going to own it holistically.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about this is, Apple sees that $40 billion worth of swipe fees out there, and it's already interposed itself in music, in video, in your telecommunications, and now it's everything else with mobile payments. And I've been using, when I was based in Asia, we were using watch-based kind of swipes for metro and subway travel since the 1990s. So in many ways, this is kind of catching up to what a lot of other folks have been using with contactless cash systems. But really cool to see Apple bring their expertise and their high levels of user experience engineering to this problem, and it's going to be a hit, I think, regardless whether this watch is the right design for the long term. But just getting people to use the system is going to be pretty incredible for Apple.
Yeah, Leander, what's your take on pay and what it means in mobile payments?
Well, like the other guest said, that pay is obviously going to be a big deal. I think there's no question about that. With Apple's install base and with all the partners they've got lined up, I can see that taking off really quickly. And it is funny, like you go anywhere in Asia and Europe and everyone else is using these contactless pay systems, and it's strange that in America it really hasn't, it's not as ubiquitous. It might take a couple of years. I think, like I went shopping yesterday and I had to go to a parking meter, and then I had to go to a coffee shop, and then I had to went to a parking garage. And it's a pity because you can see that a lot of those systems are going to take a long time to catch up with this. And it's going to be easy to drop a lot of money at Apple or at the Disney store, but elsewhere, it's going to take a while for these systems to kick in. I'd love to be able to get rid of my wallet and all the cash I carry around. But yeah, it's going to take a while to permeate.
Well, Wilson, what do you think about Apple Pay, particularly getting into the payments and swipe system? Will obviously could bring a potential a lot of money for Apple if they're going to take a little slice of money from the banks.
Yeah, I kind of, the feeling I get watching this take form is the feeling that kind of we got once we realized what iTunes was, where Apple, this technology company that made computers, suddenly had made a deal with everyone in the music business to hand over a good chunk of their revenues, or at least a sizable enough chunk that they became the dominant player in music. I think that while banks are a little shrewder than aging record labels, I do think that there's a deal being made. I don't want to say deal with the devil, but it's a deal being made across the board that could have huge ramifications and could put Apple in a very, very dominant position. The question really is, will this payment system raise up the other contactless payment systems that are around and those of competitors, or will it become the dominant player and kind of push them out? I don't know the answer to that.
Subna, you talked a little bit about the security concerns around Apple Pay. I mean, Apple now is coming off of this problem with people getting into nude celebrity selfies that were kind of released when people kind of went in and figured out passwords. Does this something where they've come off some security problems and now they're coming out and saying that they're going to have all your money in your phone? I mean, isn't that going to take a leap of faith for people to really believe the security in Apple phones?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the security itself is definitely different, but I think from a PR standpoint, that's what's fresh on everyone's mind, especially young people. I mean, just looking at the comments on BuzzFeed, people were saying, hey, they can't even protect celebrity photos. I'm going to give them all my banking information. It might not be the most correct correlation, but I think there is definitely a hesitation from that regard.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting, I mean, American Express, I've been customer of theirs for years, and they've always been very great with fraud protection and not making me pay for things that have been overcharged because someone got my information. But when you're splitting it between these two vendors, when there's two dual companies responsible for this information, how does that work out? I think that's a question that I haven't seen addressed yet.
Yeah, and Andrew, you wanted to jump in with something?
Yeah, I mean, one of the funny things about Apple is they've shown over the years that they're one of the few companies that can take the spot of having the second mover advantage, right? They've always said that they're not the first to jump on a technology, but they're going to be the ones who do it right, right? So we've had these kind of contactless electronic payment systems for a while, whether it's the mobile speed pass at the gas pump or Citibank sent me a little clip years and years and years ago I never used because I was just too nervous that if I dropped that and someone picked it up, there was no way to revoke it or anything like that. But Apple has figured out all those things for usability and to provide consumer confidence, and they have the clout as a hardware maker, and now with their position, and as Wilson said, as having the expertise in the music and video and iTunes side of things to do it right and to get mobile payments working in a way that'll have consumer satisfaction. And my suspicion is that the iWatch right now is kind of a weird device. Leander in his podcast recently said, it was kind of un-Apple-like to launch it the way that they did. Right now, it needs to be tethered to an iPhone to work, but that's kind of like the first generation iPod, right? The first generation iPod, you kind of needed to transfer music through a cable, but eventually that iPod became untethered and a device unto itself. And probably long-term, that's what we're going to see with the Apple Watch, is that as we get more technology into that thing, it's going to be a standalone thing. You'll charge over every night, and you don't need to have it tethered to a cell phone.
Yeah, Leander, what's your thought about that being kind of the second mover advantage for Apple, and also this idea that people just shouldn't bother with the first version?
Oh, I know about if people shouldn't bother. I mean, I think there's a lot of pleasure to be had in being an early adopter and being one of Apple's guinea pigs. I think it's going to. Everyone I think knows this, that it's going to turn into something else. And the first iteration. I mean, to be honest, my first reaction was, it looks just like the Galaxy Gear. It doesn't look anything special. I'd seen all these renderings with these amazing sci-fi. Wrist computers that had these revolving displays, and I was, I think me and a lot of other people were kind of hoping that Apple would come out with something really mind-blowing, and this looks, a little bit like everyone else's.
See, I disagree a little bit. I mean, I think in some senses, Leander, it does look similar in some ways to the other, especially the one that they show that's anodized metal with the rubber band that certainly has a Samsung-y vibe to it. But what struck me most was all of the combinations that you could do here between the bands and between the finishes and between the gold. There's two shades of gold. And when I walked into that room, I didn't see a watch. I saw a different watch for every person that walked in, and that was actually to me the big coup.
Yeah, they definitely have brought a lot of deep thinking to this. And I was the gold ones. I was like, it looks like something from a hideous Vegas bathroom. But some people I talked to there really liked it, and they were speculating that it's going to cost $1,000 or more, and more than likely next year it's going to be out of date. But that presented no obstacle. People were like, yeah, I'll drop $1,000 on that. They liked it. It really had that kind of lust factor.
Where it's really getting into the luxury market in a way by creating these kind of gold-plated watches. What were you going to say, Alex?
I was just going to say that back to what Andrew was saying, and then we got on this thread about the watch. I just love the idea that we're moving away from talking about these devices as phones, because despite the fact that they are a phone, that is the part of the device that I use the least. Like, if someone wants to talk to me on the phone, I get actively annoyed at them. So don't ever call me. So the fact that, we can finally address all of the things that we need in our day-to-day life without have it revolving around something that we have pulled from our history of Edison in America technology is relieving to me.
That's actually, Alex, a lot about what my colleague Jeff Fowler said in his first impressions of the phone itself, of the iPhone 6, and that is that it's getting bigger because it's not a phone anymore, and our needs are not phone needs, right?
Right. It's a computer.
And what does it mean for the iPad? I mean, when the phone just gets bigger and bigger, do we really need the iPad? I mean, does it start to eat into the iPad itself?
That's going to get bigger too. It is though.
So everything's just on the bigger scale, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be, what, 12 and a half inches or something? That the
12.9, I think. That's
12.9, yeah.
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 And with and they're going to multitask the interface, so you can have different windows from different apps at the same time. So it'll be a lot more like a laptop interface.
See, I like my iPad Mini. Oh, sorry, Andrew. Go ahead.
No, I agree. I mean, the funny thing is I think we're all getting older. Maybe as a demographic, we're all getting older. So I need the bigger screen. I can't really read my iPhone 5 anymore. I really need to hold it really far away from me. So so we're all going bigger with the phablets and the 12-inch iPads. And, you know, something that I found recently related to the phone function question is I double-tapped my iPhone recently to, you know, kill applications. And I realized the phone app was like 15 levels deep, meaning that I hadn't really made a phone call from my phone in days and days and days.
Right.
And that's just not what you use your phone for anymore.
The thing I liked the best on the Apple Watch demonstration was that ridiculous emojis for sending messages to each other. And I hate emojis, but my daughter sends me emoji messages, and I have to spend, you know, minutes sometimes deciphering them. Like, what is she talking about? I have to decode it. You know, there's a train, and then there's some hands clapping, and then there's a birthday cake, and it's, oh, she's going to come to the birthday party. But what I was liked on the watch demonstration was that using that as a primary mode of communication showed that they were really sort of thinking about some native way to use the watch that was native to the watch rather than, you know, using the iPhone. And I was like, I can see the same.
I agree totally, Leander. And I spend most of my time Googling acronyms from 26-year-old friends because I have no idea what they mean. But I think that form of communication and the other ways they've tried to integrate, you know, the things that they've, now you can get your text messages as chats and all that, like, that's not as exciting to me as moving away from phone-based communication and all these different forms.
But are we really going to send heartbeats to each other? That's the real question to me.
Yeah,
or I should say, who are you going to send it to? Who are you going to send a heartbeat to?
Yeah, what do you guys think about this idea that the watch will literally, you know, be connected to your body, your heartbeat, your workout? I mean, this is really going to talk about hacking into, you know, nude photos. What about hacking into how much exercise each person has taken and how much they've eaten each day? I mean, they talk a lot about the intimacy and the personal nature of the watch. I mean, I don't know if this bothers any of you guys, but I assume that bothers a lot of people. No, Leander's shaking his head.
Not at all. Bring it on. The more the merrier, yeah. And I don't care about people saying, you know, how much exercise I didn't do. I'd be much more embarrassed by a nude selfie getting out there than some of my health data. Although, you know, I do understand that, you know, that it is very private and that there is a lot of stuff that people do want to safeguard. But that's the least of my concerns. I mean, that really didn't, it's not on my radar. And in fact, I'm disappointed that it doesn't, you know, read my blood sugar and, tell me that I shouldn't have eaten that Snickers bar. You know, I want to see that kind of data. And
I think you're ready for an implant, basically.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. Absolutely.
The flip side is, I mean, I may trust Apple with keeping my data safe on the phone or whatever, but what happens when, like, Facebook, I allow it to see some of my data, and next thing I know, I'm getting, like blood sugar, tests, advertise. Like that's I think the slippery slope that everyone's worried about. Of course, the minute you start getting those kind of ads, you get really freaked out and you start saying, "Why do I use this service?" So,
what Tim Cook was saying today, like with the payment system, that Apple's not in the business of collecting your data, and he said that we could care less where you use your phone to make purchases, and we're not interested in what you're purchasing or where you're purchasing it. We do not collect that data. Of course, the credit card companies are, and they're using it to send you flyers in the mail and unsolicited offers. But I think of all the data brokers out there, I think Apple has the best reputation, and I trust them the most, not to look at that data and use it to sell you stuff.
The problem with that
what do you think about?
I was going to say the health thing for me is on the exact opposite side, that I don't care about this data because of what you said. There's nothing actionable. Leander was talking about, I wish it had told me it did not to eat that donut. But, having used a Fitbit or whatever for a year now, I'm like, okay, so I sleep, so I take some steps. Some days I take more, some days I take less. Nothing about it felt actionable or useful in any way. So until there's that next level of like, you don't sleep as well if you drink too much the night before, or you don't sleep as well if you have sugar after 8 p.m., then it's not exciting to me.
Yeah, it seems like there's like an aspect of kind of the watch nanny or something when it gets to that point where it's literally telling you everything you do. Sapna, do you have any concerns around, or do you think there's going to be concerns around privacy when it comes to having wearables?
I don't think so. I mean, I think Fitbit and Jawbone have shown that people are willing to share this information. They like it. And honestly, I think it's a good thing. If all these devices are often making us so stagnant, we're sitting in front of computers all the time, like if there's this component where they're tracking your health and trying to get you to move more, I think as a society that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
One thing that occurs to me, Mark, is that this celebrity hacking scandal, as embarrassing as it was for Apple and maybe damaging a little momentarily to the stock, it actually comes at a great time for Apple, if you think about it. It's this, everyone gets to go, hey, what's your privacy story? And Tim Cook has this, like, it's his imperative now to tell his privacy story and tell his data security story. And, I mean, yeah, Jennifer Lawrence just is doing, it's kind of a weird inverted PR move that gets them to, have to explain something that they do actually they're pretty good at, right? And they're only getting better.
Right.
What do you think this does, Leander, for Tim Cook? I mean, he's seen as this kind of, successor to the brilliant genius and visionary, and, it's been a lot of kind of very small iterative changes over the years. I mean, this is something, a whole new product line with Watch and with Pay. Does this kind of burnish him a little bit?
Yeah, it was funny. A lot of the stories were exactly about that. It's like this is Tim Cook's shining moment, and it puts to bed all of those worries that Apple is going to be in trouble without its visionary founder. I think Steve Jobs was obviously crucial, but he soaked up all the credit, and because the company was so secretive and it only had one figurehead, everything that Apple did was associated with Jobs, and of course. He didn't. It's a big company, and there's a lot of talent there. One of the things that surprised me actually was Tim giving a shout out at the end of this keynote to Johnny Ive and to Craig Federighi and some of the other contributors. And you've been seeing this a little bit over the other media events. The way they do that sort of rotating cast of presenters, and putting a bit more, putting other people in the company a bit more in the spotlight. And I think the shout out at this latest event was a continuation of that. And I'd love to see them giving more credit to, all the talented staff there, because there's a lot of very, very creative people in that company. I'd like to see it actually go further down, down a couple more levels to the staff. I mean, a lot of the things that we love were created by people, no one knows their names, and I think it's a shame, really.
Yeah. Wilson, what do you think? I mean, is this something that could turn around the stock? And I mean, it hasn't so far, but is this something that could really be, depending on how things go in the next year, this could be something to put Apple in the driver's seat? I mean, especially after what you see Samsung did last week, which just seemed like, let's try to steal Apple's thunder.
Well, look, there's always, I think, and Leander can probably back me up, I think there's almost always a sell-off when they present news, because it's buy on the rumor, sell on the news. I mean, this is just a very typical reaction to any confirmation of any fact for Apple. So seeing it dip now or whatever, I think it was up last I checked, but I mean, up from what though? That said, I think first of all you're going to see iPhone 6 sales, press releases, and things like that. Those are going to come. They're going to probably do. We just sold however many million in the first weekend or whatever. You'll see that stuff. That'll be deliberately there to kind of show that they have a viable next generation phone product. And then of course the stock hawks will start looking at what this phone or the watch will do once it gets closer to market. There's not a lot you can trade on right now on the watch But come the spring, there will be an awful lot.
And I'm just curious to take a poll of you all, putting on your kind of consumer hat and not as much your, I'm going to get this thing for free or I have to review it, but how many of you would go out and get an Apple Watch? Raise your hand. Okay, Leander and Andrew.
Get one?
Never the first iteration. I'm always waiting for Leander to get the terrible one, and so I can get the next version.
He can tell you all about the problem.
Exactly.
That's in our first look. We said we can't wait to see how thin the second one is.
Because you don't want to drag around this big heavy thing.
No, it's a little thick.
Yeah, but it'll eventually. It's like I've dragged out my original iPod, and that thing really is a big fat primitive brick. But it has a great, it's cool because it's not cool, and I think this watch is going to be the same thing eventually.
You can borrow my Newton.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So what about Apple Pay? What do you guys think as far as Apple Pay? Would you do that? I mean, raise your hand if you try out Apple Pay. Definitely more people in that one. Just about everyone but Fanny, it seems like, would do Apple. Oh, nope, she's raising her hand. Okay, Fanny would do it too. So yeah, it seems like the payment thing seems a little bit more obvious as something that's going to give you value versus the Apple Watch is something just really cool and you want to be the first one on your block to have it.
I bet you guys will get one though. We'll see. You should do another poll. Come around.
I'm due for a new iPhone, so I got the NFC right there in the new phone. I think that's the key. If people who have 5Ss though might want to watch just to get into Apple Pay.
Well, can we talk about sizes for just 1 second? Because obviously not only did they match the Samsung, but they went one level bigger. And the hilarity of the idea of people taking pictures with those things, like discreetly on the street, or like putting them up to their head, which these things are going to be bigger than, makes me laugh, like in advance. So I just don't see elegance in any of this.
I think Samsung did a good job of getting us over that. I mean, they were comically large 2 years ago, and now we're kind of like, oh yeah, that thing. Nokia came in with their huge one, but the sad thing is the nicer camera is in the bigger phone, so you're right about that.
Right.
And no one laughs at people taking pictures with iPads anymore. I mean, that used to look ridiculous, but now...
I still laugh at them.
I was at some event the other day, and people were using it like a periscope.
So eventually we'll be carrying around big screen TVs to take pictures, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
This is where this is going, right?
No, we'll just put our head in a giant box. We won't even look at anything with our own eyes anymore.
Our dystopian present. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate your thoughts on the subject, and it's always fun having discussion about the cult of Mac and cult of Apple, which it really is. I want to thank our panel, Alex Leo from Newsweek, Andrew Lee from American, Fanny Cohen, our producer in New York, Leander Khani from Cult of Mac, Sapna Maheshwari from BuzzFeed, Wilson Rothman from Wall Street Journal. I want to thank our sponsor, NextSpace and NextKids here in Potrero Hill. You can learn more about them at bit.ly/NextSpacePH or their other locations at nextspace.us. I want to thank PBS and the Knight Foundation for making this podcast possible. We'll catch you each and every week on the Mediatwits every Friday. Thanks, everyone.